Welcome to the session on thoughts and looks into how the Every Kiss broke everyone's hearts. I actually look into why season 2's ending was the perfect tragedy. To those who are trying not to cry, this session is maybe going to be a little sad. So let's get to it. So just a few words, sorry. I will be talking about analyzing the Every Kiss through a writerly lens, through the lens of Greek tragedies, and trying to use all of those to see why it was the sort of perfect tragic ending to the story as it is so far. So let's get to it. Just a few words about me. If you don't know me, I'm Navy Byrne. I'm an illustrator, writer, and comic artist, so have a lot of experience in storytelling and writing, obviously. So that's sort of taking that and my unhealthy obsession with tragedies and applying it to Good Omens. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram and my website, and I also have a booth in the con selling things with my art. This is one example of drawing the very kiss we're going to talk about. So let's get into it. So Good Omens 1 was the perfect comedy. So the question is, why would we think season 2 would be any different? Now, I, like probably many other people going into season 2, expected something that would be funny and lighthearted and comedic with a happy ending, like season 1 was, because season 1 was the perfect comedy. So why would season 2 be any different from that? And I remember a few days before season 2 came out that I was talking to a friend and I told her that I absolutely love Good Omens and I adore it more than anything in the world, but usually I prefer more tragic stories. And then the tragedy came to Good Omens and hit me over the head. So it was perfect and I cried for 2 days and I did not expect to cry. So this is kind of the thought that after that scene, looking back to it, what led up to this session. And especially this statement is true considering what Neil Gaiman said about season 2 being quite gentle and romantic, which turned out to be not very quite gentle and romantic. So Good Omens 2 was wonderfully tragic, as I said. So this talk will explore specifically why that kiss hit us so hard, using insights from Greek tragedy, from Aristotle's Poetics, and various creative writing techniques, including things that Neil Gaiman said himself. So the first part, sort of roadmap of the session. First, we will talk a little bit about Greek tragedies and what makes them so powerful, a little bit about the structure and some elements and motives that repeat in Greek tragedies. Secondly, the tragedy of Good Omens, which is the whole part of applying those tragic elements into the story of Good Omens 2 specifically. And the last part will be how that sort of structure of tragedy can show us insight into what season 3 will be. Just my speculation, not that I have any official info. And just one final note before we get into the actual session. Good Omens, to call Good Omens a Greek tragedy is not very true. Good Omens does not follow the structure of a tragedy, nor does it have every element of tragedy, especially looking at season 1, but it does utilize elements of tragedy very well, whether intentionally or not. So if I had to pick a sort of structure that it would be most similar to, I would have to pick the tragic comedies that showed up in Italy during the Renaissance, which is way later, but that is a point that I will also get back to later. So without further ado, let's get to it. So let's discuss why are tragedies so powerful and what does it mean for aziraphale and Crowley's story specifically. So like I mentioned before, I'm someone who really likes sad stories and really likes tragedies. So when looking into why tragedy is so powerful for me and for many other people, we can look at it through this Aristotelian lens and summarize it in one word, which is, to anyone who knows about tragedies even slightly, is catharsis. So what catharsis is, according to Aristotle, it's in the form of action, just quoting from Aristotle's Poetics, in the form of action, not of narrative, through pity and fear affecting the purgation of these emotions. So the proper purgation of these emotions. So what Aristotle means by that, or what scholars have speculated he means by that, is in the form of action, not of narrative, which means that the tragedy is played out to us in real time and not told and not summarized, through pity and fear. And pity and fear can be stand-ins for any sort of negative emotions. So it could be sadness, it could be grief, it could be anything that comes from that, affecting the proper purgation of these emotions. And proper purgation basically refers to what Aristotle calls the emotional cleansing. So it's not specific exactly what he means by emotional cleansing, but it has been speculated, and I will get into that right now. So the cleansing of emotions through artistic expression could be referred to experiencing strong, usually negative emotions in order to bring to a sense of emotional release in the end and leave the audience with new insights. So scholars have speculated whether it's purely emotional release or if the new insights part also matters a lot, and scholars disagree. But I think that Good Omens does both. So what I mean by emotional release is it shows us suffering and lets us experience painful emotions in the hope that we will feel some sort of relief in the end. And what that relief could be is could mean a lot of different things for different people. It could be relatability. If you're going through something difficult and you relate to a character that is going through something similar, that could be a form of relief. It could be a community, which is also related to that, finding people or finding characters who have been sort of through the same difficult things that you have been through, letting out pent-up emotions and also gaining new insights, either learning how to deal with these emotions or how to get out of that situation. And it works really well, in my personal opinion, because it lets us experience the suffering in a safe environment, which is fiction, which doesn't have any consequence to our real life, but it still lets us experience these painful emotions to find relatability, community, to find new ways to get out of this. So that is basically the process. So then, following the structure of Greek plays and what Aristotle thought, how then is catharsis created? So Greek tragedies usually follow a series of very specific steps, not all of which appearing in Good Omens, but I have put here the ones that do and the ones that I think that will, as I will mention later. So tragic flaw. In Greek tragedy, everything starts with a tragic flaw. The element of personality that leads to the conflict and therefore the tragedy, it is integral to the character. So Greek tragedy doesn't deal with perfectly good people, nor does it deal with the overwhelmingly evil people, which is also very relevant to Good Omens. And those tragic characters who are neither very good nor very bad have some sort of tragic personality flaw. which then leads to the conflict and everything that comes with it. This tragic flaw leads to what we call the error in judgment, which is an unwitting mistake that the character commits that then leads to the whole conflict part of the story. Then because of that mistake that the character made, the character will suffer consequences of their flaw, even if it wasn't their fault. So it is often well, not often, but happens sometimes that the mistake and the flaw is not specifically that person's fault, and I will also get into that. But the important bit is the suffering, and of course, tragedy, we like to see suffering. Not like a strong word, but yeah. And then the next part that's important is the character goes through a change to recognize that flaw, and then catharsis happened. The characters did a bad thing because of their personal tragic flaw. They suffered for it. The character went through some sort of a change, and now it recognized that, oh, I did the bad thing because X, Y, or Z. And then after they've suffered, of course, the character comes out changed in the end, that part of the catharsis. So just gonna go into here for a few details about some elements of tragedy that will also come in later. The appearance of the character of the tragic hero, basically, who tend to share some sort of common qualities that tragic heroes across various stories. So the hero of a tragedy has to be good, but not so good they're unrelatable. So tragedies usually deal with characters who are basically good, but not so good they're absolutely flawless. They're trying to do good, but they muck it up in some way. A person trying to be good, but making some mistakes on that path towards doing good. It's about a real person making bad decisions due to some flaw of their own that leads to terrible results. A mostly good character brought low because of their action. So, like I said, a realistic person who is trying to do good, making some mistakes, leading to some sort of a catastrophe, which makes them, which brings them low. A character flaw leads to disaster, as the character commits some sort of grave mistake while trying to do good. And then retribution occurs, the suffering part, the cosmic payback for the hero's mistakes. A catastrophe, a change in the hero's fortunes because of that mistake. So Aristotle recognized sort of three things that are integral to creating tragedy, to making us feel sad, basically, which are reversal, recognition, and the sin of suffering. And what reversal means is just when you think everything is going to be okay, there is a change for the worst, usually signaled by some sort of a messenger. So in tragedies, a character could think that everything is going his way, everything is going perfectly, then some sort of damned messenger comes and tell him that actually, no, bad things are happening and you will feel bad because of it. The next part is recognition. A character finally recognizes something. So a character recognizes that, oh no, I've done a bad thing, or some examples from plays. Oh no, my fiance is dead because he thought I died. That is from Romeo and Juliet. Or oh no, someone who I thought was one person is another person. Basically, any moment where a character recognizes something, and it is usually bad. And the scene of suffering brought on by exile, suicide, trauma. Usually, in Greek tragedies specifically, there is a lot of death, which will also be mentioned later. So, Aristotle also said that reversal combined with recognition creates that same pity and fear that he talked about. So reversal and recognition on their own are great, but when reversal and recognition combined, they are even better to create sadness. So whenever a character realizes something that then reverses his situation for the worst, that creates the worst kind of suffering. And one final bit about recognition. In the end, in Greek tragedies, usually the hero recognizes his mistakes and learns a new insight. And then the hero knows that even if he can't ever go back to the way things were before, because of his actions, it is now too late, that he will never be the same person, and his life will never be the same. He has still learned some new insight that would make him recognize his mistakes. So that's about cognition. One final note, one final thing that makes everything even sadder in tragedies, which happens occasionally when the mistake is not the character's fault. A lot of things can happen to make characters make mistakes when they're not specifically their fault. For example, another person convinces the character to do X, Y, or Z, or they think that they're doing X, Y, or Z while they're doing another things. So one thing that makes them even sadder is when all that suffering and disasters happen and it is not the character's fault. And another thing is when a tragedy specifically circles around the relationship of two characters when it's neither character's fault. And what I mean by that is something that I personally call that a tragedy is circular. Basically, when you can go, character A is right, and character B has a stance against character A, but they're also right. And neither of them is trying to hurt the other, but they hurt each other by both being right. And I will get into that also later. So just to sum up the short introduction to tragedies, I will bring an example of a very well-known tragedy, Romeo and Juliet, which also kind of follows elements of Greek tragedy. And it will also be integral, talking about Good Omens later on. So Romeo and Juliet also deal with mostly good characters. Romeo and Juliet, their main sort of flaw is being too young and too rash. They commit a mistake, which is getting married too quickly, despite conflicts from their family, from the church, from the what do you call it? The ruling sort of person. Sorry, I forgot the name in English. But yeah, basically good characters who commit a mistake because of their flaws, which is an understandable flaw because they are very young when the story happens, which leads to the disaster, the double suicide. So two basically good characters making mistakes leading to a disaster. So like I said, also Romeo and Juliet's mistake wasn't their fault necessarily, not being their fault being a key part. So their mistake was not specifically their fault. It was a mistake born out of love. It was getting married. It does not seem like a mistake to a couple who is in love. So and that mistake then leads to the disaster. So now that we've talked about Greek tragedies, let's go back to Good Omens. And what does it all mean for Aziraphale and Crowley's journey? Now, sorry, just one moment. So, while watching season 2, I don't know if this is just my experience or if others think the same, but in my experience watching season 2, it was very good fun. It was very enjoyable. It was a very good relievant of stress, a very good sort of take your mind away from the bad things. And it was fun, and I liked it. And during 95% of the show, I thought that yeah, this is fun. Maybe not as good as season 1, but then the kiss happened, and the kiss changed everything. And after that kiss, all those moments, well, not all of them, but some of those moments that seemed like perfectly harmless fun actually had very interesting repercussions towards the end. So when I say the Good Omens 2 ending makes sense in retrospect, what I mean is after watching the end and going back to the show and looking over the scenes and everything, that everything starts to make sense, exactly why we ended up with that ending and exactly how we came to it and why it was there for these characters. So one thing that Neil Gaiman said very recently in his Bard College lectures is he likes to set up endings like a magician sets his stage. That means we don't notice things that were always there. So he gives the example that if a magician is setting up a stage, everything the magician conjures up during the show is automatically suspicious. But things that were there before the show started, for example, a waste basket in a place we'd always expect a waste basket to be, that would never be suspicious, and we would never think that that's a part of the trick, which is exactly how I think that Good Omens 2 works. Things that were always there don't get noticed until the trick is announced, until the final the ending of the kiss. And then going back, you start to notice those things and you start thinking, well, I didn't expect to end up in this place, but looking back at everything, of course that's where we ended up. That, of course, that is what everything's been leading up to. And Neil Gaiman does that incredibly beautifully. So what I mean by that is, now that I've said that all those things have been set up, I kind of want to look at that setup and the way it illustrates both Aziraphale and Crowley as tragic characters. Now, some people may debate with me and say that in tragedies there can only be one tragic character. I disagree, and I think that in Good Omens specifically, both of them would qualify as tragic characters. Starting with Aziraphale, because everyone already blames him for the kiss and him alone, which is wrong, but why not add fuel to the fire? And if you are on the Aziraphale did nothing wrong camp, like I am, we will also blame Crowley in a bit. So Aziraphale and what I call the inability to let go of heaven. So after the show came out, Aziraphale did nothing wrong. So after the show came out, I talked to a lot of people about the ending. I talked to a lot of people about what it means, and a few people have brought up that Aziraphale is the perfect example of religious trauma. And what that would mean to a person who's been raised in a church environment. And forgive me if I'm misstepping here, it's just taking from what people said, but I have never been religious myself. So the constant justification of the church, the constantly trying to prove the church right, even when it isn't, because that's just how the church is, how you're raised for it to think that the church must be good, and therefore you try to find excuses for it being good, even when it isn't. And that, I think, summarizes Aziraphale perfectly. And let me tell you why. So Aziraphale's flaw is perfectly exemplified, I think, in the Job episode. Aziraphale is, as tragic characters are, a mostly good person. He is, of course, a bit of a bastard, but he is an angel and he is trying to do good things throughout the entire show, even when it goes against him. So in the Job episode, we see what I would call his major flaw, which is even when everything points to heaven being wrong, until the one final scene of that minisode, Aziraphale constantly tries to justify heaven. Even when he says Crowley with a permit from God, he is like, no, this must be wrong, and he goes to check in heaven and then expects an explanation. And then when they mention killing the children, he also expects them to be right in a way, and even when it's obvious they're not, he still tries to like find ways around it. And not until the one final scene in this minisode do we see Aziraphale actually acknowledge that heaven is flawed and going against them. And so Aziraphale throughout the entire show has been looking for excuses to support heaven, constantly looking to justify it, because of course he would justify it. He's an angel and angels are good and heaven is good and God is good. Why wouldn't it be? That is how not only was he, well, he wasn't raised to believe that, but he was created to believe that. He believes that in his essence as an angel, which is, I can kind of see where he is coming from. And he is unable, at least until the end, to accept that heaven isn't necessarily good. So to summarize, what I think of Aziraphale's flaw is blindness. And blindness is a repeating motive in Greek tragedies. It's a repeating character flaw. And what it basically means is characters who fail to see who they should trust, who the villain is, and even what their own flaws are. And this perfectly describes Aziraphale. He fails to see that sometimes he should trust Crowley over heaven. Sometimes he fails to see that heaven is being the bad guy, and sometimes he fails to see the flaws of heaven. And he does that several times throughout the show. These are just some examples. The Noah scene, where even though God is trying to destroy everyone, Aziraphale is still looking for excuses to justify heaven. He says, oh, it's not that bad because God is going to make a promise not to kill everyone. Or, oh, it's not that bad because it's just the people around here. She's not touching other countries, so it's okay. Even though you can see by Michael's acting and you can see on his face that he's doubting what he's saying himself. During season 1, trying to stop Armageddon, he constantly is arguing with the other angels against the war. He says to Gabriel, there doesn't have to be a war. We can stop the war. We can stop all the bad things that war brings. While the other angels are like, oh, the point is not to stop the war. The point is to win it. And even after that, Aziraphale still tries to justify heaven. Even if the other angels are bad, it's impossible that God is bad, right? So he goes to God and he says, oh, if I just talk to the right people, they will make everything okay. He is constantly looking for these excuses, these justifications for heaven, failing to see that it is not as perfect as he thinks it is. And it is most evident in this bandstand fight, which is where he says, I am a great deal holier than thou. And in this fight, he constantly brings up the point of, I am an angel, I am holy, my side is the right side. And if I just talk to God, I will get everything sorted out, because it can't be otherwise. So, yeah, the perfect representation of the Aziraphale's flaw here. And talking about where this flaw came from, which I do make the point that their flaws, it's not inherently either of their fault. And Aziraphale's flaw is not necessarily Aziraphale's fault, because he is a great deal holier than thou, because he is an angel, because he is good, and he is on the side of good, and the side of light, and the side of truth, and the side of heaven, and the side of God. So he has a very good reason to believe that God is good, because that is essentially part of his being. And if God is not essentially good, then what would it mean about him? What would it mean about heaven and everything he had ever known? Now, stating Aziraphale's flaw, let's go into Aziraphale's mistake. Now, in the final scene, Aziraphale comes into the bookshop and he tells Crowley that he has wonderful news and he is incredibly excited about them. In the ending of season 1, Aziraphale came to realize that heaven is flawed, at least I think so, because he does go against heaven. He does join our side with Crowley, even if temporarily until the end of season 2. But he still believes that heaven has an inherent goodness to it. And if he just fixes it, if he just manages the right people the right way, then he can make it as good as it can be. And that comes from that belief, that justification of heaven. And he goes up to Crowley and he's like, not only can we go to heaven and we can fix it and we can make it good, but I can also make you good, because I can make you an angel. And who wouldn't want to be an angel? Because Aziraphale knows that Crowley is good. And he's like, of course you would want to be on the side of good. Why wouldn't you? You are good. And that is Aziraphale's mistake, that blindness, that insisting that heaven is right no matter what, and that God is right no matter what, and which leads to the atrocity of him divorcing his husband in the end. Now, Aziraphale's mistake, and why we know it's a mistake. Sorry, I apologize in advance because I could not find the exact quote. But during one of the flashbacks with Gabriel and Beelzebub, they're talking about their positions as the heads of heaven and hell. And Gabriel also mentions, again, I can't find the exact quote, but Gabriel mentions that he doesn't have any choosing power either, that he never had the power to actually make meaningful choices, despite being the Supreme Archangel, which only brings home the point that what Aziraphale did going up to heaven was a mistake and is going to lead to terrible consequences for him. So that was on Aziraphale. Blindness, insisting that heaven is good, etc., etc. Now, so we talked about, I'm really sorry, I don't know what that is outside. Never mind. We know that Aziraphale is a tragic character, but so is Crowley. So to everyone on the Aziraphale did nothing wrong team, which is, again, I am on, let's start blaming Crowley. Now, talking about Crowley, Crowley has had one thing that has been consistent for him during the entire story, which is being on his own side. He was outcast from heaven and he does not get along with hell. He's doing what he thinks is right, even if it goes against hell. He is constantly insisting that Aziraphale be on their own side with him. And I think I put the quote there, which is, forget heaven, come with me. Let's be an us, let's be alone. We don't need them. So it's very easy to see that Crowley's attitude in that way is a good thing, because it is technically the point of the show. The point is either heaven or hell are good, and people are basically people, and our own side is better than those two disgusting bureaucracies, but it isn't always good. And I think that's where Crowley's flaw comes from, and it is perfectly summarized, I think, in this scene, which is, you go too fast for me, Crowley. So I will painfully remind to us all that in this scene, Crowley had previously asked Aziraphale for holy water, and Aziraphale refused because he worried about Crowley and what it might do to him. Then Crowley decides not to wait for Aziraphale, but instead stage a caper to go rob a church, which then Aziraphale finds out about because it happened behind his back, but he hears things and he comes to Crowley and gives him the holy water anyway. And then he tells him that line of, you go too fast for me. So what happened here is Crowley, without even knowing it, he forced Aziraphale's hand to do what he wanted him to do. He sort of, I don't want to say encouraged, but he kind of made it so Aziraphale had no choice but to give him the holy water, else Crowley could injure himself in the process of getting it. And this, I think, shows Crowley's flaw in relationship to his and Aziraphale's relationship, which is he does not wait for Aziraphale. He does not give him time to slow down. He does what he wants, and if Aziraphale can't keep up, then he will go do them himself. So Crowley's flaw. Crowley learned, somebody said in the chat he might as well have yelled into a megaphone about this game. Yes, he definitely. But Crowley learned that early on that neither heaven nor hell are good, and is fighting what he considers his own side. Crowley, like Aziraphale and like a tragic hero, is basically a good character. Despite being a demon, I very much doubt that any Good Omens fan would call Crowley evil. He constantly does what he thinks is right, even when it goes against heaven, even when it goes against hell, both as an angel and as a demon. He realized very early on that neither side is perfect, that neither side is good, and that is why he acts on his own. That's why he says I go along with hell as far as I can, or I'm on my side, of course. And he doesn't wait for Aziraphale to learn the same. For Crowley, in my opinion, again, as a demon, as a fallen angel, as someone who has already experienced the flaws of heaven by falling because of only asking questions, he already saw the flaw of heaven. He already experienced the flaws of heaven. And he doesn't wait for Aziraphale, who has always believed in the good of heaven, to learn what he already knows. He doesn't even understand why Aziraphale doesn't see the world as he sees it. Which can basically be summarized as over-individualism, and this is a word suggested by the lovely Nevet. I don't think she's here, but credits to her. So, over-individualism. Crowley relies only on himself and not understanding or thinking of other people. He is acting of his own side. He's acting of his own accord for what he thinks is right, and he doesn't think of other people when he does those things. Specifically, he does not think about Aziraphale. In season 1, there have been many moments where he is like, of course we're going to stop the end of the world. The end of the world is bad, and he doesn't wait around for Aziraphale to realize that on his own too. And many other moments. This has been exemplified also many times. I just have some examples here. In this scene where he goes to Aziraphale and he goes, let's go stop the end of the world. And when Aziraphale doesn't listen and again say that, oh, he will just talk to God and get it sorted out, then Crowley doesn't wait for him and just leaves immediately. In the bandstand scene, also referencing before, Crowley doesn't wait for Aziraphale to realize what he already knows. Aziraphale keeps going on, oh, I'm a great deal holier than thou, I'm an angel and all of that, while Crowley keeps shouting about how stopping the end of the world is necessary, which again, he is correct, but he doesn't wait for Aziraphale to learn that also. And in the job scene, something very interesting happens, which is Crowley has, throughout the minisode, admitted that he's on his own side and he's a demon that doesn't go as far as hell. And in the ending of that scene, when Aziraphale asks what does him going against God mean for him, Crowley says, you're just like me. I am a demon who goes against hell occasionally. You're an angel who goes against heaven occasionally. And this could be just my speculation, but couples who have been together for a long time tend to reflect on each other and assume that the other thinks exactly as they think. So again, take this with a grain of salt because this is just my speculation, but it could possibly be that Crowley thinks that because he loves Aziraphale, he thinks that Aziraphale is the same way as he is, without Aziraphale saying it himself. Aziraphale does agree with him, but only until later. Because, and just like Aziraphale has a very good reason for his blindness, Crowley also has a very good reason for his over-individualism, which is, if Aziraphale is holier than thou, then Crowley is the opposite of that. Crowley has mentioned his fall numerous times, sorry. And so, of course, it has a very strong effect on him. Of course, it has a very strong hold on him and very strong repercussions for him. And I think that part of it, at least, is knowing that heaven is inherently flawed. He says, I only ever ask questions, therefore my fall isn't justified, therefore heaven is flawed. And of course he sees hell is flawed because hell is flawed. It's not that hard to miss. So he has a very, very good reason for believing that heaven is flawed and that hell is flawed, and it's better to be on their own. So just like with the aziraphale, Crowley's flaw is also not entirely his fault. Now Crowley's mistake in the ending, this sort of whole over-individualism thing, leads up to the mistake, which is, as soon as aziraphale comes and gives his point about let's go up to heaven, Crowley doesn't discuss what he said with him. Instead, he goes completely into the other direction of what Maggie and Ida told him to do, and that is say, let's go on our side, we don't need anyone else, let's be on our own. And he doesn't understand why aziraphale doesn't understand him, because he knows he is right. And he is right, according to the story, where it leads, according to the point that Neil Gaiman said over and over again. But he doesn't wait for aziraphale to realize that, nor does he try to explain to him why heaven and hell are toxic. He just says that they are, as if it's common knowledge. And it might not be to an angel who has his entire life has been thinking otherwise. So that essentially, I think, is Crowley's mistake. Now that we've talked about them individually, let's get to the every case, the funnest part. So what I've said about when a tragedy is around two people, both sides are right, both sides' points conflict with each other, and both of them being right hurts the both of them, and it's neither of their faults. Crowley knows that neither side is right. We have seen that in the show ourselves. We know that Crowley is right, and he wants to go with aziraphale, where heaven and hell couldn't be wrong to them anymore. Crowley is right. Now, looking at it from aziraphale's point of view, in like a circle, aziraphale's want to fix heaven and go there is also, in aziraphale's opinion, right, because remember, aziraphale thinks that heaven is essentially good and that God is essentially good. And if he just fixes heaven, if he just makes some management adjustments, then he can make heaven as good as he always known it to be. Aziraphale is right in aziraphale's opinion, Crowley is right in Crowley's opinion, and those opinions clash and they both hurt us. And that is where I think the great tragedy comes from. This sort of circle of aziraphale saying we can fix heaven, we can do good there, and Crowley thinks we don't need either side, we can just be an us, and it's neither of their faults. Because both of them are tragic characters, because both of them have justified flaws, because both of them commit mistakes, not because they're evil, but because they're flawed, which is again justified. And that is why, in my opinion, the tragedy hurts as bad as it does. And everything has been hidden in a series of arguments and minisodes and flashbacks this entire time to lead us exactly to that point, like a magician stage is set up, and show us this heartbreak. Now, neither of them in the end intends to hurt the other, and both of them have good intentions, which sort of summarizes what I've just said. So on top of that, on top of using the structure, Neil Gaiman also, I can't say intentionally, but he uses recognition, reversal, and a signal by a manager. It is a recognition because Crowley thinks that Aziraphale will go with him because they are them, they are together, they have always been, and he doesn't understand why he would do the opposite. Aziraphale thinks that heaven is good and perfect and good, and he doesn't understand why Crowley would not agree with him. It's a recognition for the both of them, and it is a reversal. Think of season 2 up until now. The moments leading up to this is Gabriel and Beelzebub reuniting, going to have their happy ending, Maggie and Nina finding common ground together, so everything is going great. In the one final moment, the situation reverses for the terribleness. And also, one more thing, like in many Greek tragedies, it is signaled by a messenger, the Metatron. Somebody should try firing these messengers because before they ruin every tragic character's life. So, yeah. And one more note, which I will kind of go fast over because of shortness of time, but this sort of tragedy has been set up before. In the very first argument of the series, the argument over Jim, Crowley thinks he's right because Jim, as in Gabriel, has hurt them, so why should we help Gabriel? Meanwhile, Aziraphale says, we should help people because he has nobody to help him. Both of them are right. Both of them are hurting each other by being right, even when they don't intend to. So, final part is where this tragedy will lead and what does it mean for season 3. This is, again, in my opinion. So, during those very same Bard College lectures, which I mentioned, according to Neil Gaiman, stories have a point signaling the entrance into the final act, where before this point, things were set up and afterwards things will change, which in his story is often a kiss. So he talked about this moment, this entrance into the final act, where up until now things have been set up, and just like before the kiss, things have only been set up. After the kiss, characters will start to change, things will start to happen, which will lead into the eventual ending of the story. And in his stories, it is very accidentally, he said, always a kiss. It happened in American Gods and in Anansi Boys and now in Good Omens. In the end of the final act, characters change and learn new things and go to the next step in the spiral, which means they may physically return to the same place they were in before, but they will never be the same people they were before. So he refers to it as the spiral. They will never be the same as they were in the beginning, just like tragic characters in classical tragedies. So I wanted a few notes on why a kiss. A kiss is a private moment, an intimate moment between two characters. Tragedies, classical tragedies, often end in death. Comedies, on the other hand, often end in a kiss. Good Omens 2's entrance into the final act was a sad kiss. A perfect blend of the comedy elements of season 1 and the tragic elements of season 2, which is why I think that Good Omens, all in all, is a tragic comedy. And the tragic comedy, by definition of Italian Renaissance plays, are tragedies with a happy ending that both entertain and bring meaning at the same time. So if it follows the same sort of narrative that I'm describing, just like tragic comedies, the Good Omens tragedy will end in a happy ending. Sorry, it's replaying for some reason. So we have already seen Aziraphale and Crowley as tragic characters. We have seen them try to be good and screw it up and make mistakes. we haven't seen them, those last few steps, we haven't seen them suffer the consequence of those mistakes, and we haven't seen them recognize or learn from them. In short, we haven't seen the suffering that it brings, and we haven't felt the release of the emotion. In short, we have not experienced catharsis. So a personal theory of mine, if it follows the same sort of thing that I'm describing, if what we speculate they will end up in a cottage, meaning they will have a happy ending, I think season 3 will show them suffering, will show them experience the consequences of what they've done, and will end in a happy ending with both of them change, with both of them having learned something, and just as Gaiman has hinted at, and as we hope, in a cottage. And that is what I think season 3 will explore. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A tab. The session has technically ended, but I will be here still, and you can find me in these socials. And